Hey, it's Katie, and welcome back to my booktube channel. For today's video, I will be doing my May wrap-up, and this month was kind of a weird reading month for me because I actually moved from one apartment to another, so I kind of took some breaks in reading, but I still managed to read 13 books, which I'm very surprised, and typically I read like 6,000 pages a month, and I still got really close. I read like 5,800 pages, and that's mostly because a lot of the books I read, or like I started the month with some like 600 and 700 page books, which were a lot. So that's where most of my pages came from. But it was still a pretty good reading month. I'm honestly still surprised that I got back into double digits, but I will be sharing my thoughts on these books, and I do have Goodreads reviews for all of them. So my Goodreads is linked below if you want to hear some more of my thoughts. But let's jump into it. I started the month of May by reading From Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout, and I actually did a reading vlog while I was reading this book, so I will try to remember to link that below if you want to see more of my thoughts on this book. But I probably don't have to give you guys a summary. I'm sure you've all heard plenty about this series, and I really enjoyed it. It was definitely worth the hype for me, which I'm so glad, because whenever I pick up a book that is super hyped up in the book community, I get really nervous that I'm gonna hate it. But I'm so glad that I really did enjoy it. I've always really loved Jennifer L. Armentrout's writing, and this book was no different. It's so easy to understand, but it's also still so captivating, and I love the worlds that she creates, and I also love how she wrote Poppy and Hawk's characters. Poppy was very different from how I expected her to be, and she was definitely different in the best way possible, and I am so excited to read the next two books. I have the Fairy Loot editions of this series coming. I think they're supposed to ship in June or July, so hopefully I will get those soon, and then I also have them on hold at the library, so hopefully super soon I will be able to continue this series because I really loved it, and I ended up giving this book 5 stars. The next book I read was Corrupt by Penelope Douglas, and this was my first Penelope Douglas book, and it was also my first like dark, twisted romance. I really tend to love like the darker themes in some of the fantasy romances that I read, and so I wanted to try something a little different, and this was actually an audiobook that I listened to, which definitely made the steamy scenes a little more interesting because it was like the first book I've really listened to those scenes instead of reading them, and it definitely made me a little uncomfortable, but in a good way because I still really did enjoy this book. I totally am blanking on the characters' names right now, and so it's gonna make it a little hard for me to describe what this book's about to you guys, but I know that we have our main character, who is this girl who has been hanging around this family for most of her life, and people always pair her with the younger son because they're like the same age. But she's always been like fascinated and infatuated with the older son, and he doesn't really give her the time of day. He's honestly kind of a little mean to her, but she can't help but be super aware of his presence whenever they're in like the same room together. And I think he's always just thought of her as his little brother's girlfriend. And then this book takes place years later, and he's back in town with his group of friends, and apparently there's like this huge revenge plot against her because she was the reason that his friends went to jail years ago. And so the whole time you see these two characters interact, you know that he, along with his friends, are plotting this huge way to get revenge against her, and it's definitely very interesting, very twisted, and kind of messed up, but I still really enjoyed it, so I don't know what that says about me, but definitely there are some trigger warnings, I'm sure, and it's definitely very dark, so I would definitely check out the trigger warnings and make sure that's something that you would be okay reading before jumping into this book. But like I said, I really enjoyed Corrupt. I ended up giving it 4 stars, and It was my first dark romance, so it was very interesting. And it was like I couldn't stop thinking about the book when I wasn't reading it, and part of me felt guilty for enjoying it because it was so like demented, but it was too good for me to not continue reading it. So it was definitely interesting, and I'm excited to read more of wow. And I'm excited to read more from Penelope Douglas. After reading Covet, I moved on to Crush and Covet by Tracy Wolff, which are books 2 and 3 in the Crave series. And if you don't know what this series is about, it basically follows this human girl named Grace, and something happens to her parents, and so she goes to Alaska to live with her uncle and her cousin at this academy. And what she doesn't realize is that at this academy, all of the other students are basically paranormal creatures. So there's vampires, there's werewolves, there's witches, there's dragons, like everything you could imagine essentially. And so while she's there, she meets Jackson, who is actually a vampire, and she doesn't know it, and they start to interact, and he's trying to get her to stay away from him. It's this whole thing. It's very funny. Each chapter has a title, which always makes me laugh, and it's just honestly really great. I can't really describe how much I love it. I definitely talked about Crave in my April wrap-up if you want to see my thoughts, or I have my thoughts on Goodreads as well, but this has quickly become one of my favorite series. I cannot get enough of these characters. Like I said, I read both of these books, and I read them so fast. This one I think is like 600 pages. No, this one's like 700 and this one's like 600 something. And so they're so huge, but I could not put them down. I'm obsessed with this world and these characters, and I cannot wait for the 4th book to come out later this year. With Crush, I think it had a pretty slow start for me. It took me a while to really get into it, but I really loved watching Grace figure out who she is and find out all the things that she can do, and it was so great to watch her like develop throughout this book. And we also get to meet one of my favorite characters, Hudson. He is one of my favorite book boyfriends, and he also is just a very complex, morally gray character. I know we all love those, and I just loved seeing him in this book and watching him interact with Grace. It was just really great. And then there were also these tournaments or games. I cannot pronounce it. It's like, I'll try to put it up on the screen. It's like Ludares, whatever that is. It's like these really cool games where all the students get to use like their paranormal powers, and like there's little portals you can fall through. It's kind of like football, but like you have 2 teams trying to reach their end zone, but the longer you hold on to the ball, the more it shakes and it starts to burn your hands. So you have to like pass it to your teammates, and like everybody has to touch it before it crosses the end zone, and it's just craziness. It's like complete chaos in the best way possible, and I loved seeing it play out in here. It was so cool. I was definitely fascinated, and I kind of want this to be like a TV show or something so that I can see it played out like visually, because I think that'd be really cool. And then we have Covet, which made me feel so many emotions. I feel like that's really the main thing I can tell you about this book without spoiling things, but there is a lot of action. You get to see all your favorite characters. Even the ones who were technically just side characters in the beginning become a big part of this book as well. And it was just so nice to see them all again, even though everything that they're experiencing is kind of a lot to go through. But it was really, really cool. And it just, I hate how great the endings of these books are, because they always are like the biggest cliffhangers, and this is the first time where I've actually had to wait for the next book to come out, and I'm very impatient. So I need it to be the fall so we can get book 4 in this series. After that, I took a little break from fantasy, and I ended up reading The Proposal by Jasmine Guillory. And I'm pretty sure this is actually a companion novel to The Wedding Date, which I have read in the past, and I was honestly a little disappointed with it, but it was also like my first adult romance that I had read, so it could have just been my expectations for what it was supposed to be. But anyway, this book was definitely better than The Wedding Date in my opinion. I really loved it. If you have read The Wedding Date, you will remember Carlos, who was Drew's, I think that was the main character's name? Drew's best friend. So we met Carlos briefly in the wedding date, and now this book, he is the love interest and one of our main characters. So in the proposal, we have Nick, who went to this baseball game with her boyfriend, and all of a sudden, in the middle of the game, he puts her name up on the Jumbotron and basically proposes to her in front of an entire stadium during a baseball game, and she is totally caught off guard because they've only been dating for a few weeks or a few months, I can't remember, but it's very early on in their relationship, and he didn't even spell her name right on the Jumbotron. So she's basically traumatized. She's trying to let him down easy, even though everybody's staring at her. And so after he kind of storms off, everybody is still staring at her. People are trying to like ask her questions about it. And so Carlos is there with his sister, and they decide to go up to her and save her from all these people and pretend to be like long lost friends, and basically like sweeps her away from all of the chaos. So as you could probably guess from the description, this is definitely an adorable rom-com, and I really loved seeing Carlos because he was actually my favorite character from the wedding date, so it was very nice to see him again and to see him get a shot at love. Carlos and Nick are both very fun characters. They're both very career-driven, and they have their own really great friends, so that was probably my favorite part of the book. I loved the way that they kind of interacted with each other and kind of pushed each other, and it was honestly a pretty good book. This was actually another audiobook that I listened to. That was kind of my thing this month with trying to pack and all of that, so this was another one, and I think I ended up giving this one 3 stars. Up next is one of my favorite books that I read this month, and that is Kiss My Cupcake by Helena Hunting. What I've learned during this video is that I need to write the characters' names down because I am struggling, but I'm pretty sure the characters in this book were Ronan and Blair, so hopefully that's right, or this is about to be a really awkward summary. But on one hand, we have Blair, who decided to kind of branch off from the family business, and she's finally starting her own cupcake shop, which she has always wanted, and it's a really cool place. She obviously sells cupcakes, but then she also serves alcohol there, so it's a very cool vibe. But next door, we have Ronan, who has a bar of his own, but he also has like an axe throwing area, and he has live entertainment. So Blair realizes that it's kind of a struggle to have a business like hers right next to such a loud business like Ronan's, and so she kind of storms over there, and their first interaction is anything but friendly, and so they kind of get off on the wrong foot, and there's obviously a ton of like banter and some arguments and also a good amount of sexual tension, which was probably my favorite part. I always love good banter between characters, so it's definitely very interesting. It's a very adorable book. It was still very like heartfelt and meaningful, but you still get a lot of that like fiery passion with their arguments and with them kind of messing with each other. I also really loved that you kind of get this entrepreneurial aspect to the story because both of our main characters are business owners, so you kind of get a little behind the scenes of what it would be like to own your own business, which is really cool. And then we also get to meet both of their families, which honestly was one of my favorite parts as well. I always love watching characters interact with their families and to see kind of where they come from, and I don't know, it was just also a very sweet moment, so there's also the family aspect as well. This is actually another audiobook I listened to. I didn't realize I listened to so many this month, but I really liked this. I ended up giving it 4 stars, and I definitely love Helena Hunting's writing. This is my second book of hers, and I plan on reading a lot more. After that, I decided I needed to read something that was very comforting to me because moving was very emotional and very stressful. So I ended up rereading the entire Carvalh series by Stephanie Garber, and I actually went through and tabbed all of my favorite scenes since I was rereading, and they are still just as great and as magical as I remember. I also decided to reread this series specifically because not only is it one of my favorites, but I had read Caraval exactly 1 year before when I started rereading it. So that was very special to me because that's the book that got me back into reading and inspired me to make this channel. So I wanted to reread it and just feel all that nostalgia. So in this book, we have Scarlett, who has never left this tiny island she lives on with her sister Tella and her cruel father. Now, Scarlett's father has arranged a marriage for her, and so she feels like her dreams of seeing Carvalh are over. And Carvalh is this once-a-year performance where the audience gets to participate in all of the magic. But this year, Scarlett's dreams do come true because she gets the invitation she has been waiting for her whole life. And along with the help of this mysterious sailor, Tella whisks Scarlett away to Carvalh. But when they get there, Tella is kidnapped, and Scarlett learns that this year's games revolve around Tella. So she'll have to follow all the clues along with the other performers, and whoever finds Tella first wins. Scarlett has been told that everything that happens during Carvalh is a performance, but the more that she's immersed in this game of love and heartbreak and magic, she's not really sure what's real and what's not. This is probably the book I talk about the most on this channel, and rereading it just kind of confirmed all the reasons why I love it. I love this world, and Carvalh in general is just so amazing. The thin veil between fantasy and reality is so well done, and I loved following the clues along with the characters. It's just so great. All of these characters are some of my favorites, and they jump right off the page. I love Scarlett and Tella's bond as sisters. It's just so amazing to witness, and the love interests in this series are really great as well. I was also trying to think about which one of these books was my favorite, and I think if I had to choose, I would probably choose Legendary, which is the second book, just because I think I connect with Tella a little bit more than I connect with Scarlett, and it's just, this whole series is so great. So please go ahead and pick it up if you haven't already. It's something I could probably talk about for a very long time. The next book I read was another audiobook called 10 Things I Hate About Pinky by Sandhya Menon. So in this book, we have Pinky, who is on vacation with her family. I think it's during summer break, and she has never gotten along with her mother. They always butt heads, and it's just not a very good mother-daughter relationship, and so she decides that she will finally do something that her mother would approve of, and she reaches out to Samir and asks him to pretend to be her boyfriend while they're on vacation. And Samir agrees because he had this whole big summer internship planned, but when he got there to start his first day, it fell through, and so he has nothing to do that summer. So even though Samir and Pinky have never really gotten along, he decides, you know what, I'm not ready to go back home, so let's just try it out. And Pinky also promises him an internship with one of her parents because Samir wants to be a lawyer and both of her parents are lawyers. And so it's definitely just as complicated as you could imagine, especially because they already don't get along, so pretending to date during the summer vacation is very, very interesting. And their personalities are very different, which is so interesting to read. Pinky is very loud, but like not in a bad way. She's just very into all of these little causes that her family doesn't really understand. She's kind of big on activism, and so she wants to do all of these things, and her mother just will never understand why she makes some of the decisions that she makes, whereas Samir has like his whole life kind of planned out. Every day he writes like a list of everything he wants to do that day. He's very organized and kind of just the exact opposite of Pinky. That's kind of the best way I can describe it. They're like polar opposites, and there's a lot of bickering, a lot of banter between the two of them, and I really enjoyed this book. It's definitely really angsty and maybe a younger YA book, at least from what I typically like to read. But I really loved that this wasn't just a cute romance. We also got to see the family relationships kind of worked through. You definitely get to see them struggle a lot throughout the book, but at the end of the day, I think they really tried to work on things together, and that was probably my favorite aspect, even more than the romance. So even if this romance isn't for you, I really did still enjoy it for that reason, but I gave this one 4 stars. The next book I ended up reading was Hang the Moon by Alexandria Bellefleur, and this was an arc I had the privilege of reading, and it actually came out at the end of May, so it is out now for you guys to read. But this book follows Brendan, and he is determined to prove to his childhood crush that romance is not dead by recreating all of his favorite moments from his favorite rom-coms. And Brendan works for, he actually might own like this dating app company, while the love interest, I cannot remember names today, I don't know what her name is, but I think she was friends with his sister or something like that. So they'd always known each other when they were younger. But she has never really believed that true love exists because she has had some relationships in the past that didn't really work out for her. And so she's just kind of given up. And he makes it his goal to change her mind. And this was a very adorable romance. Like, I know I say that a lot, but this one was just very wholesome and sweet and adorable, and if you're really looking for something that kind of warms your heart, I recommend this one. I thought the characters in this story were very refreshing, and also I think this is a companion novel to Written in the Stars, but I had not read that prior, so even if you have not read that one, you can still definitely read this one, and it makes perfect sense. But if you have read Written in the Stars, I think this book does reference the main characters from that book, so you do get to see them as well if that's something that you're looking for. I really did enjoy Alexandria Bellefleur's writing. This was my first book of hers, and I thought it was really great. And I also really loved at the beginning of some chapters there were some like zodiac astrology things that I thought were really fun, so if that's something you like as well, you do get those little tidbits. After that, I read To Kill a Kingdom by Alexandra Christo, and I do have a full book review for this book, which I will link below if you want to check that out. But I really liked this one as well. I know this is super hyped up, especially on Book Talk, so you've probably seen this somewhere before, but this is a nautical fantasy romance. And I really did enjoy it. I don't think I loved it as much as I expected to, but I still think it's a very good fantasy romance. In this book, we have Princess Lyra, who is Siren royalty and the most lethal of them all because she has the hearts of 17 princes, one for every year that she's been alive. But then there's this twist of fate that forces her to kill one of her own, and as punishment, the Sea Queen forces her to turn into a human, and before the winter solstice, she needs to bring Prince Elian's heart to the Sea Queen, or she will stay human forever, which is like the last thing that sirens ever want. And then on the other hand, we have Prince Elian, who is the heir to the most powerful kingdom in the world. But he kind of doesn't want anything to do with being a prince. He would much rather hunt sirens, which he thinks is his calling. And one day he saves this drowning woman, but she is more than what he thinks she is. This is also a Little Mermaid retelling, so you definitely get aspects of The Little Mermaid in here, which were probably some of my favorite moments. If you're looking for a nautical book with some fantasy and romance elements, I think this is for you. It definitely gives off complete pirate vibes. Like I said, I really enjoyed the retelling aspect as well. And it also has really great banter. And the main reason I wanted to read this one was because I read Daughter of the Pirate King by Trisha Levenseller in April. And I really, really enjoyed that. So I was looking for another nautical book. And although I didn't enjoy this as much as Daughter of the Pirate King, I still really did like this. And I gave it 4 stars. And then the very last book that I read in May was The Bright and the Pale by Jessica Rubinkowski, and I actually did a reading vlog for this book, which I will also link below if you would like to check that out. This book follows 17-year-old Valeria, who is one of the only people to survive the freeze, which was this dark magical hold that trapped her village, including her family, in this sheet of ice. Ever since then, she has been on the run from the Tsar, who is determined to capture anyone who managed to escape. In the meantime, Valeria finds refuge in the Thieves Guild, and she ends up doing all of these odd jobs for them, along with her best friend, Alec. But then one day Alec is brutally murdered and she is absolutely devastated until a year later she finds out that he's been alive the whole time. And in order to save him, she needs to lead a group of thieves and cutthroats up into the mountains where the freeze happened in the first place to kind of win his freedom back. The only thing is, something sinister definitely lives in those mountains. This book is inspired by Russian folklore, which I really enjoyed, and if you are not a fan of romance in fantasies, I think this book would be for you because there are little bits of romance throughout the book, but it is definitely not a huge part of the story. This is a very plot-driven story. The world is very well done, and it's also very slow-paced but still intriguing because this obviously takes place during this huge expedition into the mountains. So it's all like this one big journey, and it's still very interesting even though it is kind of slow-paced. So if that sounds interesting to you, I think this one would be perfect. But I really loved the Russian folklore element. It was definitely my favorite part of the story, and this book was actually a lot darker and had some like thriller horror elements, which I was not expecting, but it was so cool. I feel like it added a lot to the story. So definitely be aware of that before you jump into this. But I think it was really well done, and I ended up giving this one 3 stars. So definitely go ahead and check this out. I think this one came out in March, so it's still a relatively new release this year. Those are all of the books that I read in May. I hope you guys enjoyed hearing my thoughts, and if you'd like to see more of my thoughts, like I said, I do have full reviews on Goodreads for all of these books, and my Goodreads is linked below if you want to check it out. Please comment what your favorite book you read in May was. I would love for some book recommendations, so go ahead and do that. And also like and subscribe to my channel. I would really, really appreciate it. And if you do subscribe, please click the notification bell so you know when I upload next. Thank you guys so much for watching. I can't wait to see you in my next video.